When David told me his Denver project would keep him away for 6 months, I believed him. I packed his suitcases with the same care I'd shown for 15 years of marriage, included his lucky tie and favorite coffee mug, kissed him goodbye at our front door on Maple Street. What I didn't know was that I was helping him pack for a completely different kind of life, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I'd loved since college. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I found the construction permits in his truck glove compartment, permits dated 3 years in the future for projects that didn't exist, I realized David hadn't just been lying about where he was going. He'd been lying about who he was entirely. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until 8 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I'm 38 years old, an environmental consultant who put her career on the back burner when our twins Emma and Jake were born 12 years ago. David and I met during our junior year at Colorado State University, where he studied construction management, and I was working toward my environmental science degree. He was the guy who could fix anything, build anything, solve any problem with his hands and his mind. I fell in love with his confidence, his dedication to creating something lasting and meaningful through his work. We settled in Riverside after graduation, a charming Colorado town nestled between rolling hills and distant mountain peaks. David started as a project manager with a local construction firm while I worked for the county's environmental compliance division. When the twins came along, we made the decision together that I'd transition to part-time consulting so one of us could be more present for our children. David's career flourished while I managed our household, supported his networking efforts, and took on freelance projects that allowed me the flexibility to be the school volunteer, the soccer mom, the one who remembered everyone's schedules and appointments. Our colonial-style home on Maple Street became the gathering place for neighborhood barbecues and holiday celebrations. David had built our deck himself, installed custom cabinets in the kitchen, and created a workshop in our garage where he'd spend weekend hours teaching Jake how to use tools, while Emma preferred to help me in the garden. We were the couple other families looked up to, the ones who'd made it work, who'd built something solid and enduring. David's construction company, Blue Mountain Construction, had grown from a small residential outfit to landing major commercial contracts throughout Colorado. His success meant business trips became more frequent over the past 3 years, sometimes lasting weeks at a time. Projects in Denver, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, each one requiring his personal oversight and expertise. I admired his dedication, even when it meant missing Jake's baseball games or Emma's school plays. Success requires sacrifice, I'd tell myself, and David was building something significant for our family's future. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday. I made coffee in our kitchen while watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold through our window above the sink. David was scheduled to leave for Denver that afternoon for what he described as the biggest project of his career, a mixed-use development that would establish Blue Mountain Construction as a major player in Colorado's commercial market. The project timeline was aggressive, he explained, requiring 6 months of intensive on-site management to ensure quality and deadline compliance. I'd grown accustomed to his longer absences, but 6 months felt different, more permanent somehow. The night before his departure, we'd sat on our back deck sharing a bottle of wine while the kids finished their homework inside. The conversation felt heavier than usual, weighted with something I couldn't identify at the time. "This project changes everything for us, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes focused on the mountain silhouette rather than my face. "When it's finished, we'll have the financial security we've always wanted. The kids' college funds will be set. We can travel. Maybe you can go back to school for that master's degree you've talked about." His words should have excited me, but something in his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced the speech multiple times. I dismissed the feeling as my own anxiety about his extended absence and focused instead on being supportive. "You've worked so hard for this opportunity," I replied, reaching for his hand. "We'll miss you terribly, but I'm proud of what you're accomplishing." The morning of his departure, I helped him load his extended stay suitcases into his pickup truck. He'd packed differently this time, taking more personal items than usual. His guitar, which typically stayed in our bedroom corner collecting dust, was carefully secured in the truck bed along with boxes of books and family photos. When I questioned the extra items, he explained that 6 months was a long time, and he wanted familiar things to make his temporary apartment feel more like home. I prepared his favorite breakfast of blueberry pancakes and thick-cut bacon, coffee served in the ceramic mug I'd given him for our 5th anniversary that read "World's Best Dad." Emma and Jake were unusually quiet, sensing the significance of their father's longest departure. We ate together as a family one final time, David promising to video call every evening and return home for Jake's birthday in September. After the kids left for school, David and I stood in our driveway, sharing what I believed would be a temporary goodbye. He held me longer than usual, his embrace carrying an intensity that felt almost desperate. "I love you, Sarah," he whispered into my hair. "Remember that, no matter what happens. Promise me you'll remember how much I love you and the kids." The words struck me as odd, unnecessarily dramatic for a business trip, but I attributed his emotion to the stress of such a significant project. "Of course I'll remember," I replied, smoothing his shirt collar one final time. "You're going to do amazing work in Denver. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself and call us every day." He climbed into his truck without looking back, waving once as he pulled out of our driveway and disappeared down Maple Street. I stood there until his truck was completely out of sight, struck by an inexplicable sense of finality that I couldn't shake. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what exactly had triggered my unease. The first week of David's absence passed normally. He called each evening as promised, sharing details about his hotel, the construction site, the challenges of coordinating with Denver city planners and subcontractors. His voice sounded different somehow, more formal and distant, but long-distance relationships often created that artificial barrier. I focused on maintaining our children's routines, managing the household independently, and continuing my part-time environmental consulting work. By the second week, the evening calls became less frequent and shorter in duration. David explained that project demands were intensifying, requiring longer hours and complete focus on resolving construction delays and permit issues. I understood the pressures of his work and didn't want to add guilt about family obligations to his professional stress. When Emma asked why Daddy wasn't calling as much, I assured her that important work sometimes required complete attention and that he missed us terribly. The third week brought a phone call that would plant the first seeds of doubt about David's Denver project. My neighbor Karen Williams knocked on our door Wednesday evening while I was helping the twins with their math homework. Karen's husband Tom worked for Colorado's Department of Transportation, and their dinner conversation had included mention of major construction projects throughout the state. Tom was asking about David's Denver project, Karen explained, settling into our kitchen chair with a cup of coffee. He reviews environmental impact assessments for large commercial developments, and he couldn't find any record of the mixed-use project David described. Tom thought maybe the project was being handled through different channels, but he wanted to check if David needed any assistance with state compliance issues. The information didn't immediately alarm me. David's company handled many types of projects, and not all would require state-level environmental review. I thanked Karen for Tom's offer to help and made a mental note to mention their conversation during David's next call. When I did bring up Tom's inquiry, David's response seemed rushed and slightly irritated. "Tom's probably looking at the wrong database," he said, his voice carrying an edge I rarely heard. "This project involves private funding and streamlined permitting processes. Not everything goes through the standard state channels, especially when you're working with experienced developers who know how to navigate the system efficiently." His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his tone suggested he didn't want further discussion about project details. I dropped the subject, not wanting to create additional stress for him during what he'd described as an already challenging situation. The fourth week of David's absence coincided with Emma's school science fair, where she was presenting a project about renewable energy sources that we'd worked on together for months. David had promised to attend via video call, but when the evening arrived, his phone went straight to voicemail. Emma's disappointment was visible as she presented her project to judges and parents while I recorded everything on my phone, hoping David would at least be able to watch the footage later. When he finally called the following day, his apology felt perfunctory and distracted. "I'm sorry, Sarah, something urgent came up at the site that required my immediate attention. You know how these things go with construction projects, delays cascade, and suddenly everything becomes a crisis. How did Emma's presentation go? I described Emma's success and the judge's positive feedback, but David's responses felt automatic, like he was multitasking during our conversation. Background noise suggested he was in a busy restaurant or bar rather than his hotel room, and when I asked about the sounds, he claimed to be having a working dinner with project stakeholders. The fifth week brought Jake's championship baseball game, another event David had promised not to miss despite his Denver obligations. I'd arranged the video call in advance, positioning my laptop on the bleachers so David could watch Jake pitch. When game time arrived, David's call never came. Jake kept glancing toward my laptop screen between innings, his disappointment growing more visible as the game progressed without his father's virtual presence. That evening, David's explanation for missing Jake's game marked the moment my doubts transformed into genuine concern. A major safety incident at the construction site had required emergency meetings with city officials and insurance representatives, he claimed. The situation was serious enough that all project management personnel were required to surrender their phones during the crisis meetings to prevent information leaks. The story felt elaborate and defensive, containing more detail than David typically provided about work situations. Moreover, his voice carried a quality I'd never heard before, a careful precision that suggested he was choosing words deliberately rather than speaking naturally. When I asked specific questions about the safety incident, his answers became vague, and he quickly changed the subject to asking about the kids' schoolwork. By the sixth week, David's communication had become sporadic and increasingly impersonal. Days would pass without contact, followed by brief text messages apologizing for project demands and promising longer conversations that never materialized. When we did speak, his voice sounded different, more relaxed and casual than someone dealing with the intense pressure he'd described. Background sounds during calls suggested social environments rather than construction sites or business meetings. The breaking point came during the seventh week, when Emma needed help with a school project about local architecture and asked if she could interview her father about construction techniques. I called David's hotel room directly, using the number he'd provided for emergencies, only to be told by hotel staff that no David Mitchell was registered as a guest. When I called David's cell phone to clarify the confusion, he claimed there had been a booking error, and he'd moved to a different hotel without updating me. His explanation felt implausible, and for the first time since his departure, I found myself questioning not just the details of his story, but the fundamental truth of his Denver project. The accumulation of missed calls, background inconsistencies, and defensive responses had created a pattern that I could no longer ignore. Something was wrong, and I needed to understand what David was really doing during his supposed business trip. The morning I decided to investigate was a Thursday in early May, exactly 8 weeks after David's departure. The kids were at school, and I had the house to myself for the first time since becoming a single parent, managing our household alone. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, systematically reviewing every conversation and text message from the previous 2 months. The inconsistencies were more obvious when examined together, creating a timeline that didn't align with David's claimed project schedule. I began with what should have been simple verification, calling Blue Mountain Construction's main office to inquire about David's Denver project timeline. The receptionist, Maria, had been with the company for 5 years and knew our family well. Her response to my inquiry sent a chill through my entire body. "Sarah, I think there might be some confusion," Maria said carefully. "David hasn't been assigned to any Denver projects. Actually, he requested a leave of absence 2 months ago, for personal reasons. I assumed you knew about his time off since he mentioned family matters requiring his attention." The words hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't been working in Denver at all. For 8 weeks, he'd been lying about everything, constructing an elaborate fiction about business trips and project deadlines, while actually taking personal leave from his job. The implications crashed over me in waves, each realization more devastating than the last. If David wasn't in Denver working, where was he? What was he doing? Who was he with? I thanked Maria and ended the call, my hands shaking as I set down the phone. The man I'd trusted completely, the father of my children, the partner I'd built a life with over 15 years, had been living a lie for 2 months. Every evening call, every text message, every explanation for missed family events had been a carefully crafted deception. I felt sick to my stomach as I considered the possibilities of what David's real activities might involve. The rational part of my mind insisted there could be innocent explanations. Perhaps David was dealing with a personal crisis he didn't want to burden me with, or maybe he was planning some kind of surprise that required secrecy. But the evidence suggested something much more troubling, something that would require systematic investigation to uncover the full truth. I spent the rest of the morning searching through David's home office, looking for any documentation that might provide clues about his actual activities. His desk drawers contained the usual business papers, tax documents, and project files from previous construction jobs. Nothing suggested any Denver connections or recent project activities. His computer was password protected, but I noticed several folders on his desktop with dates corresponding to his supposed Denver timeline. The most revealing discovery came from an unlikely source: David's truck registration and insurance papers filed in our home office cabinet. According to Colorado Department of Motor Vehicles records, David's pickup truck had been involved in a minor fender bender 6 weeks ago in Colorado Springs, not Denver. The insurance claim form listed an address I didn't recognize in a Colorado Springs neighborhood I'd never visited. Colorado Springs was only 90 minutes from Riverside, close enough for day trips but far enough to maintain the illusion of extended business travel. The location made no sense if David was working on a Denver project, but it suggested he'd been spending significant time in a city he'd never mentioned. The insurance paperwork provided concrete evidence that David's story about Denver was completely false. As I sat in his office chair holding the insurance documents, I felt the foundation of my marriage cracking beneath me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David hadn't just lied about a business trip. He'd created an entirely fictional scenario involving non-existent projects, imaginary hotels, and fabricated work crises. The level of deception required to maintain such an elaborate falsehood for 2 months suggested that whatever David was really doing, it was significant enough to risk destroying our marriage if discovered. The betrayal felt deeper than a simple affair, though I was beginning to suspect infidelity was part of David's deception. This was systematic lying, a complete reconstruction of reality designed to hide activities that required months of preparation and execution. David had looked me in the eyes every morning for 8 weeks, had kissed me goodbye knowing he was living a lie, had missed our children's important moments while pretending to be building our financial future. I made copies of the insurance documents and began creating a file of evidence, though I wasn't sure yet what I was documenting or how I would use the information. The discovery process felt overwhelming, like trying to solve a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. I only knew that David's Denver story was false, and that whatever truth lay beneath his deception would likely change our lives forever. That afternoon, while waiting for Emma and Jake to come home from school, I called my sister Amanda in Phoenix. Amanda had gone through a difficult divorce 3 years earlier and had developed a network of resources for women navigating marital crisis. I hadn't planned to tell her about David's lies, but hearing her voice broke down my emotional barriers. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Amanda asked immediately, recognizing the strain in my voice despite my attempts to sound normal. "I think David has been lying to me about everything," I replied, and then found myself sharing the entire story of his supposed Denver project, the inconsistencies in his communication, and my discovery of the Colorado Springs insurance claim. Amanda listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me organize the timeline of David's deception. "You need to hire a private investigator," Amanda said finally. "This isn't something you can figure out on your own, and you need professional documentation of whatever David is doing. I have a contact in Colorado, someone who helped a friend of mine with a similar situation. His name is Robert Chen, and he's based in Denver but covers the entire Front Range area." The suggestion of hiring a private investigator made David's deception feel more real and more serious. I wasn't just dealing with a husband who'd lied about a business trip. I was facing a situation that required professional investigation to understand the scope and implications of his actions. The thought terrified me, but I knew Amanda was right. I needed answers, and I needed them documented by someone with experience in uncovering the truth about deceptive spouses. Robert Chen's office was located in a modest building in downtown Denver, and his credentials included 15 years of experience with marital investigations and corporate fraud cases. When I called to schedule an appointment, his assistant mentioned that cases involving extended fake business trips were more common than most people realized, usually involving either affairs or financial improprieties that required significant time away from home to execute. The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday, giving me a weekend to prepare questions and gather any additional evidence I could find. I felt like I was preparing for battle, assembling ammunition for a war I'd never wanted to fight. The man I'd loved and trusted for 15 years had become an adversary I needed to investigate, and the transformation felt surreal and heartbreaking. As I tucked Emma and Jake into bed that night, I studied their faces and wondered how David's deception would ultimately affect their lives. They'd been asking fewer questions about their father's absence as the weeks passed, adapting to his sporadic communication and broken promises with the resilience children develop when adults fail them repeatedly. I realized that David's lies weren't just betraying me, they were betraying our children's trust and security. The weight of keeping David's deception secret while protecting the kids from unnecessary worry felt overwhelming. I was essentially living a lie myself now, pretending their father was working hard for our family's future while knowing he was engaged in activities that could destroy everything we'd built together. The isolation of carrying such knowledge while maintaining normal daily routines was exhausting. That night, I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with David for 12 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what truth his investigation might reveal. The possibilities ranged from relatively benign midlife crisis behavior to scenarios that would fundamentally alter our family's future. Whatever Robert Chen discovered, I knew that David's elaborate 8-week deception had already changed our marriage irrevocably. Even if his actual activities proved innocent, the systematic lying and manipulation had broken something essential between us. The next morning brought another inconsistency that added to my growing file of evidence. David's credit card statement arrived in the mail, something I typically reviewed for household budgeting purposes. The charges from his supposed Denver business trip told a story completely different from his descriptions of hotel stays and work-related expenses. Instead of charges from Denver hotels and restaurants, the statement showed extensive activity in Colorado Springs, including recurring charges at an upscale apartment complex called Mountain Vista Residences, regular purchases at a grocery store chain that didn't exist in Denver, and frequent transactions at restaurants and entertainment venues David had never mentioned. The pattern suggested he'd been living in Colorado Springs rather than traveling for business, maintaining a separate residence and social life that required substantial financial resources. The apartment complex charges were particularly significant, showing monthly rent payments that indicated David had been maintaining a Colorado Springs residence for at least 3 months before his supposed Denver project began. This meant his deception had been planned well in advance, requiring preparation and financial investment that suggested serious commitment to whatever activities required his extended absence from home. I printed copies of the credit card statements and added them to my evidence file, each new document making David's betrayal feel more calculated and deliberate. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a brief lapse in judgment. It was a systematic plan that had been developing for months, while David continued to share our bed, participate in family activities, and present himself as a devoted husband and father. The financial implications were also becoming clear. David had been using our joint resources to fund his secret Colorado Springs life while I managed our household expenses alone and worried about the impact of his reduced income during his supposed unpaid Denver assignment. The money he'd been spending on rent, dining, and entertainment in Colorado Springs could have covered Emma's orthodontics, Jake's summer baseball camp, or the home repairs we'd been postponing due to budget constraints. As I prepared for my Monday appointment with Robert Chen, I realized that David's deception went far beyond marital infidelity. This was financial fraud against our family, emotional manipulation of our children, and a complete abandonment of the responsibilities and commitments that defined our marriage and our life together in Riverside. The investigation I was about to launch would likely expose truths that would force me to make decisions about our marriage and our family's future. But after 8 weeks of living with David's lies, I knew I couldn't continue accepting his fictional version of reality. Our children deserved honesty, I deserved respect, and whatever David was really doing in Colorado Springs needed to be brought into the light, no matter how painful the consequences might prove to be. Robert Chen's office occupied the third floor of a glass building that overlooked Denver's bustling downtown district. The waiting room featured neutral colors and comfortable furniture that seemed designed to put anxious clients at ease, though nothing could calm the nervous energy that had been building in my chest since I'd made the appointment. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a manila folder containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered about David's fabricated business trip. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, offered me coffee and assured me that Mr. Chen was finishing up a phone call and would be with me shortly. I declined the coffee, knowing my stomach was already too unsettled to handle caffeine, and used the waiting time to review my notes one final time. The timeline of David's deception looked even more damning when laid out chronologically, a clear pattern of escalating lies and increasingly elaborate explanations for his absence. When Robert Chen emerged from his office, he was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with an understated professionalism that immediately put me at ease. His handshake was firm, his eye contact steady, and his demeanor suggested someone who'd heard every possible variation of marital deception during his 15 years in the investigation business. He invited me into his office, which was decorated with diplomas, professional certifications, and photographs of Colorado landscapes. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, settling behind a desk that was organized but not overly neat, "I understand from our phone conversation that you're concerned about your husband's extended business trip to Denver. Before we discuss the specifics of your situation, I want you to know that everything we talk about today is completely confidential, and you're under no obligation to proceed with an investigation if you decide it's not the right course of action." His words were reassuring, but they also made the situation feel more real and more serious. I was actually sitting in a private investigator's office, preparing to hire someone to spy on my husband of 15 years. The thought felt surreal and heartbreaking, but I knew I'd reached a point where professional help was necessary to uncover the truth about David's activities. I opened my manila folder and began sharing the evidence I'd compiled, starting with the phone call to Blue Mountain Construction that had revealed David's leave of absence. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad as I described the inconsistencies in David's communication, the Colorado Springs insurance claim, and the credit card charges that contradicted his claims about staying in Denver. When I finished presenting my evidence, Robert leaned back in his chair and studied his notes for several moments before responding. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has been engaged in a systematic deception that required significant planning and financial resources. The level of detail in his false story, combined with the evidence of ongoing activity in Colorado Springs, suggests this isn't a simple case of marital infidelity or a midlife crisis impulse decision." His assessment confirmed my worst fears while also validating my decision to seek professional help. This wasn't something I could investigate on my own, and the complexity of David's deception suggested that whatever truth lay beneath his lies would likely be more complicated than a straightforward affair. Robert explained his investigation process, which would begin with surveillance of the Colorado Springs address associated with the credit card charges and the insurance claim. He would document David's daily activities, identify any associates or companions, and gather photographic evidence of his actual lifestyle during the supposed Denver business trip. The process typically required 1 to 2 weeks for extended absence cases, though the timeline could vary depending on what patterns of behavior were discovered. The financial aspect of hiring a private investigator felt daunting, but Robert's fees were reasonable, and he offered payment plans for clients facing marital crises. More importantly, he emphasized that documented evidence from professional investigation would be crucial if David's deception led to divorce proceedings or legal disputes about asset division and child custody. The investment in professional investigation could protect my interests and my children's future if David's lies had deeper financial or legal implications. As I signed the investigation contract, Robert asked several questions about David's typical behavior patterns, his social connections, and any recent changes in his personality or interests that might provide clues about his motivations. I found myself describing subtle shifts I'd noticed over the past year, but had attributed to work stress or natural changes that occur in long-term marriages. David had become more secretive about his phone calls, more critical of our social circle, and less engaged with family activities even before his supposed Denver project began. Looking back with the perspective of someone who now knew David had been planning an extended deception, those earlier changes took on new significance. His growing distance from our family life, his dismissive comments about Riverside's small-town limitations, and his increasing focus on financial independence suddenly seemed like preparation for the life he was actually living in Colorado Springs, rather than natural evolution of his personality and interests. Robert scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following Friday, giving him a full week to conduct initial surveillance and gather preliminary evidence. He assured me that he would call immediately if he discovered anything that suggested immediate danger or illegal activity, but most marital investigations revealed lifestyle choices rather than criminal behavior. His calm professionalism was reassuring, though I knew the next week would be excruciating as I waited for answers about what David was really doing with his time and our money. The drive home from Denver gave me time to process the emotional reality of having hired someone to spy on my husband. The mountain scenery that usually provided comfort and perspective felt different now, shadowed by the knowledge that David had been traveling this same route regularly while lying to me about his destination and activities. Every exit sign for Colorado Springs reminded me that he could be there right now, living a life I knew nothing about while I managed our household and raised our children alone. When I arrived home, Emma and Jake were at their respective after-school activities, giving me time to compose myself before facing their inevitable questions about my day. I'd told them I had business meetings in Denver related to my environmental consulting work, which was technically true, though it omitted the devastating personal nature of my actual business. The kids had grown accustomed to my increased independence during David's absence, but I worried about how Robert's investigation findings might ultimately affect their lives and their relationship with their father. That evening, while helping Jake with his science homework and reviewing Emma's upcoming piano recital schedule, I felt the weight of maintaining normalcy while knowing our family's foundation was potentially crumbling. David called around 8 o'clock his usual time, with his typical update about project challenges and timeline adjustments. His voice sounded relaxed and casual, completely inconsistent with someone dealing with the intensive construction management issues he claimed were consuming his time and attention. "David," I said carefully, testing his response to unexpected questions. "Jake was wondering if you could explain the difference between load-bearing and non-load-bearing walls for his science project about structural engineering. Could you walk him through the basics?" David's hesitation was brief but noticeable, before he launched into a technical explanation that sounded rehearsed, rather than the spontaneous expertise I would have expected from someone currently managing a major construction project. His answer was accurate but generic, the kind of information easily found online rather than the specific insights that would come from hands-on daily experience with structural engineering challenges. The conversation continued with his usual inquiries about the kids' activities and my consulting work, but I found myself analyzing every response for signs of deception or distraction. His questions felt perfunctory, like someone going through expected motions, rather than a father genuinely interested in his family's daily experiences. When Emma asked to speak with him about song selection for her upcoming recital, David's attention seemed divided, with background noise suggesting he was in a social environment rather than the quiet hotel room he claimed as his temporary residence. After the kids went to bed, I spent the evening researching Mountain Vista Residences, the Colorado Springs apartment complex, where David's credit card showed recurring charges. Their website featured upscale amenities, including a fitness center, pool, and community spaces designed for professional residents. The rent prices were substantial, representing a significant financial commitment that David had never discussed with me despite our usual practice of making major financial decisions together. The apartment complex's location in Colorado Springs placed it near several recreational areas, including hiking trails, golf courses, and entertainment districts that would appeal to someone seeking an active social lifestyle. The surrounding neighborhood featured restaurants, shopping centers, and cultural venues that suggested David had access to amenities and activities that weren't available in our smaller Riverside community. The contrast highlighted how different his Colorado Springs experience was from the intensive work environment he'd described during his Denver project updates. I also researched Colorado Springs' population demographics and discovered a thriving community of young professionals, many working in technology, aerospace, and outdoor recreation industries. The city's culture seemed to emphasize outdoor activities, social networking, and career advancement opportunities that might appeal to someone feeling constrained by small-town family life. David's choice of Colorado Springs over Denver for his secret residence suggested he was seeking a specific type of lifestyle experience that our Riverside community couldn't provide. The financial implications of David's double life were becoming clearer as I calculated the monthly costs of maintaining an apartment, regular dining expenses, and entertainment activities in Colorado Springs, while continuing to contribute to our Riverside household expenses. The numbers suggested that David had access to financial resources I wasn't aware of, or that he was making spending decisions that would ultimately impact our family's long-term financial security and the kids' college savings plans. Tuesday morning brought another piece of evidence that deepened my understanding of David's deception timeline. While organizing our home office for tax preparation, I discovered a folder of travel brochures and apartment listings for Colorado Springs, dating back 6 months before David's supposed Denver project began. The materials included detailed information about short-term lease options, furnished rental properties, and recreational activities available in the Colorado Springs area. The discovery proved that David's Colorado Springs plans had been developing for at least 8 months, during a period when our marriage had seemed stable and our family life routine. He had been researching and planning his secret life while participating in Emma's parent-teacher conferences, attending Jake's baseball games, and celebrating our 14th wedding anniversary with apparent enthusiasm and genuine affection. The level of advanced planning required for David's deception was staggering, and suggested that his dissatisfaction with our marriage and family life had been growing for much longer than I'd realized. His ability to maintain normal, intimate relationships with me and engaged parenting with the kids while secretly preparing to abandon us for extended periods demonstrated a capacity for emotional compartmentalization that I found deeply disturbing. I photographed the Colorado Springs materials and added them to my evidence file, though their discovery raised more questions than answers. Had David been planning a permanent relocation to Colorado Springs? Or was this extended absence a trial run for more significant changes to our family structure? Were there other people involved in his Colorado Springs life, and if so, had they been part of his planning process? The brochures and apartment listings suggested careful research and consideration, rather than impulsive decision-making. Wednesday brought an unexpected conversation with Emma that provided another perspective on David's recent behavior patterns. While driving her to piano lessons, she mentioned that several of her friends had been asking about her father's extended business trip and whether our family was experiencing problems. Kids at school had noticed David's absence from various events and activities, and some had shared stories about their own parents' work-related travel or marital difficulties. "Mom," Emma said carefully, her 12-year-old intuition picking up on tensions I thought I'd been hiding successfully, "is everything okay with you and Dad? He seems different when he calls now, like he's not really paying attention to what we're saying. And some of my friends think it's weird that his business trip is lasting so long without him coming home even for weekends." Her observation confirmed what I'd been sensing during David's phone calls: the growing disconnection and lack of genuine engagement with our family life. Emma's question also highlighted how David's extended absence was affecting our children's social experiences and their sense of security within our community. Other families were noticing the pattern of David's absence and drawing conclusions that might impact how Emma and Jake were perceived by their peers. I assured Emma that adults sometimes face complicated work situations that require extended travel, and that her father's absence didn't mean anything was wrong with our family or their relationship with him. My response was carefully crafted to provide reassurance without making promises about David's future behavior or our family's stability. The conversation reinforced my determination to uncover the truth about David's activities, so I could make informed decisions about protecting the kids from potential future disruptions. That evening, I called my sister Amanda to update her on the private investigator and seek her advice about managing the emotional stress of waiting for answers about David's deception. Amanda had experienced the devastating discovery of her ex-husband's secret life, though his betrayal had involved gambling addiction rather than the mysterious lifestyle David appeared to be maintaining in Colorado Springs. Sarah, Amanda said gently, the waiting period is almost the hardest part, because your imagination fills in the blanks with every possible scenario. Try to focus on what you can control, which is gathering information and preparing yourself for whatever Robert discovers. Don't try to predict or assume what David's activities involve, because the truth is usually different from what we expect, either better or worse than our fears. Her advice was practical and compassionate, reminding me that speculation about David's Colorado Springs life was unproductive and emotionally exhausting. I needed to focus on maintaining stability for Emma and Jake while allowing Robert to conduct his professional investigation without interference or premature conclusions about what he might discover. Thursday morning brought a call from Robert with his first preliminary update. His initial surveillance had confirmed that David was indeed maintaining regular residence at Mountain Vista Residences in Colorado Springs, arriving and departing according to patterns that suggested established routines rather than temporary accommodation. Robert had observed David engaging in recreational activities, including hiking, golf, and dining at upscale restaurants, often with companions whose identities he was still working to determine. The surveillance had not yet revealed evidence of romantic involvement with another person, though Robert emphasized that 1 week was insufficient time to document all aspects of David's Colorado Springs lifestyle. His daily activities suggested someone enjoying leisure time and social opportunities, rather than someone dealing with intensive work-related stress or personal crisis situations. More significantly, Robert had confirmed that David's pickup truck displayed Colorado Springs parking permits and bore evidence of regular local use, rather than the temporary visitor status that would be expected from someone temporarily in the area for business purposes. His vehicle registration had been changed to a Colorado Springs address, a legal requirement that suggested David had established formal residency rather than maintaining temporary accommodation during his supposed Denver project. The information was both relieving and devastating. David wasn't engaged in obviously dangerous or illegal activities, but he had clearly been living a completely separate life that involved formal legal changes to his residency status. The Colorado Springs address change represented a level of commitment to his secret life that went far beyond a temporary escape from family responsibilities or a brief midlife crisis exploration. Robert scheduled our Friday meeting to review additional evidence he'd gathered and discuss next steps for the investigation. He mentioned that David's daily patterns suggested weekend activities that might provide more insight into his social connections and long-term intentions regarding his Colorado Springs residence. The scope of the investigation would depend on what specific information I needed to make decisions about my marriage and my family's future. As I prepared for Friday's meeting, I realized that David's deception had evolved beyond simple marital betrayal into something that would require legal and financial consultation regardless of whether romantic infidelity was involved. His secret residency change, the financial resources being diverted to support his Colorado Springs lifestyle, and his systematic lying to our family created issues that would affect asset division, child custody arrangements, and spousal support considerations if our marriage ended. The week of waiting for Robert's investigation results had been emotionally exhausting, but also clarifying in terms of my priorities and decision-making process. Whatever David was doing in Colorado Springs, his willingness to lie extensively to his family and make significant life changes without consultation or consent had fundamentally altered our relationship dynamics. Even if his activities proved relatively innocent, the trust and communication that had been the foundation of our marriage had been irreparably damaged by his elaborate deception. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I prepared to learn more details about David's secret life. Emma and Jake left for school with their usual hugs and backpack checks, unaware that their mother was about to receive information that might change their family structure forever. I dressed professionally, as if preparing for an important business meeting, which in many ways accurately described my appointment with Robert Chen. The drive to Denver felt longer than the previous week, with every mile bringing me closer to answers I both needed and dreaded. The investigation had already confirmed my worst suspicions about David's systematic deception, but I knew there were still details to be discovered about his motivations, his companions, and his long-term intentions regarding our marriage and family. Whatever Robert had documented during his week of surveillance would provide the factual foundation I needed to make informed decisions about protecting myself and my children from further betrayal and emotional damage. As I parked outside Robert's office building, I took several deep breaths and reminded myself that knowledge, however painful, was better than continued uncertainty and deception. David had chosen to construct an elaborate lie that had lasted for 10 weeks and counting. I had chosen to uncover the truth, whatever personal cost that discovery might require. The next hour would provide answers that would guide the most important decisions of my adult life. Decisions that would affect not only my future but the future of Emma and Jake as well. Robert Chen's office felt different this Friday morning, charged with an anticipation that made my palms sweat as I waited for him to review the week's surveillance findings. He'd spread a series of photographs across his desk, each image documenting aspects of David's Colorado Springs life that I'd never seen or imagined. The pictures painted a portrait of a man living with freedom and apparent happiness, a stark contrast to the stressed project manager he'd portrayed during our phone conversations. The first photograph showed David emerging from the Mountain Vista Residence's apartment complex, dressed in casual hiking gear and carrying equipment that suggested he was heading for outdoor recreation rather than construction site management. His posture was relaxed, his expression content completely different from the exhausted professional he claimed to be during our evening calls. The timestamp indicated Wednesday morning at 8:30. A time when he'd supposedly been dealing with critical project delays requiring his immediate attention. Additional photographs documented David's activities throughout the week, creating a timeline that contradicted every aspect of his Denver project narrative. Images showed him playing golf at an upscale Colorado Springs country club, dining at outdoor cafes, browsing through art galleries, and attending what appeared to be social gatherings with people I didn't recognize. His clothing in each photograph was expensive and stylish, suggesting he'd purchased an entirely new wardrobe to complement his Colorado Springs lifestyle. Robert spread out financial documents he'd obtained through professional channels, showing that David had opened bank accounts, established utility services, and signed a year-long lease agreement for the Mountain Vista apartment, all using documentation that indicated permanent residency rather than temporary accommodation. The lease had been signed 4 months before his supposed Denver project began, proving that his Colorado Springs plans had been developing even longer than the travel brochures I'd discovered suggested. "Mrs. Mitchell," Robert said carefully, "your husband has established what appears to be a permanent alternate residence in Colorado Springs, complete with legal and financial infrastructure that suggests long-term planning. Based on the documentation I've gathered, he's been developing this secondary life for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The activities I've observed suggest someone enjoying retirement or extended vacation rather than someone managing intensive work responsibilities." The financial analysis was particularly revealing. David had apparently been diverting money from our joint accounts gradually over the past year, creating a financial foundation for his Colorado Springs lifestyle without triggering obvious red flags in our household budget. The amounts were carefully calculated to avoid detection, suggesting sophisticated planning and intimate knowledge of our family's spending patterns and financial monitoring habits. More concerning was Robert's discovery that David had been meeting regularly with a financial advisor in Colorado Springs, apparently discussing investment strategies and asset protection mechanisms that would shield resources from potential divorce proceedings. The meeting suggested that David was not only living a secret life, but preparing for the possibility that his deception would be discovered and result in marital dissolution. The surveillance photographs also documented David's social connections in Colorado Springs, including frequent interactions with a group of people who appeared to be outdoor enthusiasts and recreational athletes. These companions seemed to share David's interests in hiking, cycling, and other activities that had never been prominent aspects of his personality during our marriage. The social group appeared to be primarily single or divorced individuals in their 40s and 50s, suggesting that David had found a community that supported his desire for independence from family responsibilities. Robert handed me a photograph that made my stomach clench with recognition and betrayal. The image showed David embracing a woman outside a Colorado Springs restaurant, their body language suggesting intimacy that went beyond casual friendship. The woman appeared to be in her early 40s, with auburn hair and athletic build, dressed in outdoor gear that matched David's hiking attire. Their interaction showed comfort and familiarity that indicated an established romantic relationship rather than a recent connection. The woman's identity was Jessica Martinez, a divorce attorney specializing in asset protection and complex property division cases. Robert's research had revealed that Jessica had recently gone through her own contentious divorce and was active in Colorado Springs' professional and recreational communities. Her legal expertise would provide David with sophisticated guidance about protecting his interests while maintaining his elaborate deception about his whereabouts and activities. The implications of David's relationship with a divorce attorney were staggering and suggested that his Colorado Springs lifestyle was part of a calculated strategy to position himself advantageously for ending our marriage. Jessica's legal knowledge would have informed David about asset concealment techniques, residency requirements for favorable divorce jurisdiction, and strategies for minimizing spousal support and child custody obligations. Robert explained that divorce attorneys were ethically prohibited from assisting clients in concealing assets or committing fraud. But Jessica's personal relationship with David created a gray area where her professional knowledge might inform his decision-making without constituting formal legal representation. The relationship was particularly troubling because it suggested that David's deception involved not just personal infidelity, but strategic preparation for dissolving our marriage on terms that would maximize his financial and legal advantages. Additional surveillance had documented David and Jessica engaging in activities that reinforced their romantic connection, while also suggesting extensive conversation about legal and financial topics. Photographs showed them reviewing documents at outdoor cafes, meeting with other professionals who appeared to be financial advisors or real estate agents, and participating in social gatherings where David was introduced as Jessica's partner, rather than as a married man temporarily in Colorado Springs for business purposes. The documentation painted a picture of David living authentically as part of a new relationship and social community, while maintaining the fiction of his Denver project to delay my discovery of his actual activities. His phone calls to our family had become perfunctory obligations that interfered with his real life rather than genuine attempts to maintain connection with his wife and children during a temporary work-related separation. Robert's investigation had also uncovered David's pattern of weekend activities, which provided insight into his long-term intentions regarding his Colorado Springs residence and his relationship with Jessica. Saturday and Sunday surveillance showed them behaving as an established couple, sharing domestic responsibilities, entertaining friends, and participating in community activities that suggested permanent partnership rather than casual dating. The weekend observations were particularly painful because they revealed David experiencing the kind of relationship satisfaction and personal fulfillment that had been absent from our marriage for months before his departure. His interactions with Jessica showed attentiveness, affection, and engagement that he hadn't demonstrated with me or our children in recent memory. The contrast suggested that David hadn't just been deceiving me about his location, but about his emotional availability and commitment to our family. More devastating was Robert's documentation of David's complete immersion in Colorado Springs life, including membership in recreational clubs, volunteer commitments, and professional networking that indicated he viewed his new residence as permanent rather than temporary. His social media activity, which I hadn't monitored during our marriage, showed him participating in community events and celebrating milestones with Jessica and their shared friend group, all while maintaining radio silence about his wife and children in Riverside. The evidence suggested that David had effectively created a parallel life where our marriage and family didn't exist, allowing him to experience the freedom and romance of new relationship development without the legal and financial consequences of divorce. His Colorado Springs identity was authentic, while his continued marriage to me had become the fiction he maintained to protect his assets and avoid immediate custody and support obligations. Robert's investigation had extended beyond documenting David's activities to researching the legal implications of his behavior for potential divorce proceedings. His systematic asset concealment, establishment of separate residency, and romantic relationship with a divorce attorney would constitute grounds for allegations of fraud and misconduct that could significantly impact property division and spousal support determinations. The surveillance evidence would also support arguments about David's fitness as a custodial parent, given his willingness to deceive his children about his whereabouts and activities for extended periods. His ability to maintain elaborate lies while participating in family phone calls demonstrated a level of emotional manipulation that family courts would consider when determining custody arrangements and visitation schedules. Robert recommended that I consult immediately with my own divorce attorney to understand my legal options and protect my interests before David realized his deception had been discovered. The element of surprise would be crucial for preventing further asset concealment and ensuring that divorce proceedings occurred in jurisdictions favorable to my financial and custody interests, rather than venues David might have been strategically establishing through his Colorado Springs residency. As I studied the photographs and documents spread across Robert's desk, I felt the last remnants of my marriage dissolving into something that had apparently been illusion for months or possibly years. David hadn't just been unfaithful or dishonest, he had systematically constructed an alternate reality that allowed him to experience the life he preferred, while maintaining the legal and financial benefits of our continued marriage. The cruelty of his deception extended beyond the obvious betrayal to the calculated manipulation of our children's emotions and expectations. Emma and Jake had been participating in nightly phone calls with a father who was living as another woman's partner, while pretending to miss his family and work hard for their financial security. David's willingness to exploit his children's love and trust for his own convenience demonstrated a level of selfishness that I'd never suspected he possessed. Robert provided me with copies of all surveillance materials and a detailed written report that would serve as evidence in legal proceedings. He also offered to continue surveillance if I needed additional documentation of David's activities, or if circumstances changed in ways that required further investigation. His professional demeanor couldn't entirely mask his personal reaction to the case, suggesting that even someone experienced with marital deception found David's behavior particularly calculating and extensive. The financial analysis Robert had compiled showed that David's Colorado Springs lifestyle was being funded through systematic diversion of resources that should have been supporting our family's current needs and future security. His expenditures on rent, dining, entertainment, and recreational activities in Colorado Springs exceeded our family's monthly discretionary spending in Riverside, meaning that his secret life was being prioritized over his children's orthodontics, extracurricular activities, and college savings. The scope of David's financial deception suggested that he'd been planning his exit strategy for much longer than even the extensive evidence indicated. His knowledge of our family's financial patterns, combined with Jessica's legal expertise, had enabled him to conceal resources and establish separate financial infrastructure without triggering obvious warning signs that would have prompted my earlier investigation. As our meeting concluded, Robert emphasized the importance of acting quickly to protect my legal and financial interests before David realized his surveillance detection was possible. He recommended specific attorneys who specialized in complex asset division cases and had experience with situations involving systematic deception and concealment. The next few weeks would be crucial for establishing legal protections and beginning formal proceedings before David could implement whatever exit strategy he'd been developing with Jessica's guidance. I left Robert's office with a heavy folder of evidence and a clarity about my situation that was both liberating and terrifying. The uncertainty of the past 10 weeks had been replaced by documented proof of David's comprehensive betrayal, but the evidence also confirmed that my marriage was not salvageable and that protecting my children's interests would require immediate legal action. The drive back to Riverside felt like traveling between two different worlds: the Denver metropolitan area where David's deception had been documented, and the small mountain community where I'd been raising our children alone while believing his lies about working hard for our family's future. The contrast highlighted how completely David had compartmentalized his life, maintaining different identities and relationships in different geographical locations. I spent the drive processing the emotional impact of seeing photographic evidence of David's happiness with Jessica, while I'd been struggling with loneliness, financial stress, and the challenges of single parenting during his supposed business trip. His contentment in the surveillance pictures was genuine, suggesting that his dissatisfaction with our marriage had been profound enough to justify systematic deception and financial fraud, rather than honest conversation about his desire for different life experiences. The timing of my return to Riverside coincided with Emma and Jake's arrival home from school, forcing me to transition immediately from processing devastating evidence about their father's betrayal to maintaining maternal stability and normalcy. Their excited chatter about upcoming weekend activities and school projects felt surreal against the backdrop of my knowledge about their father's actual activities and living situation in Colorado Springs. That evening brought David's usual phone call, which now carried entirely different meaning given my knowledge of his actual circumstances. His voice sounded relaxed and happy, consistent with someone who'd spent the day hiking and dining with his girlfriend rather than managing construction crises. His questions about our activities felt perfunctory, going through motions to maintain his cover story rather than expressing genuine interest in his children's lives. When Jake asked about the timeline for David's return from Denver, his response was vague and evasive, suggesting that project complications might extend his absence indefinitely. The answer now made perfect sense given his actual living situation with Jessica, but it also demonstrated his willingness to keep our children in uncertainty about their father's availability and commitment to their family relationships. After the kids went to bed, I began researching the divorce attorneys Robert had recommended, focusing on lawyers who had experience with cases involving asset concealment and complex financial fraud. The legal process ahead would be challenging and emotionally difficult, but I knew that David's extensive deception had made divorce inevitable, and that protecting my children's financial security required aggressive legal representation. I also began preparing for the practical challenges of revealing David's deception to Emma and Jake, who would need age-appropriate explanations for why their father had been lying about his location and activities. Their sense of security and trust had already been affected by his extended absence and decreasing emotional availability, but learning about his intentional deception and alternate life would require careful handling to minimize psychological damage. The folder of surveillance evidence sat on my kitchen table like a bomb waiting to explode our family's remaining stability. The photographs and financial documents represented the end of our marriage as I'd understood it, but they also provided the foundation for building a new life based on honesty rather than elaborate deception. David had made choices that prioritized his personal happiness over his family's well-being, and those choices had consequences that would reshape all of our futures. Sunday morning brought an unexpected call from David that provided an opportunity to test my ability to maintain composure while knowing the truth about his activities. He sounded particularly cheerful, mentioning that his project timeline had shifted again and that he might need to extend his stay in Denver for several additional weeks. His casual tone suggested he felt secure in his deception and confident that I wouldn't discover his actual whereabouts or activities. His mention of timeline extensions now clearly related to his desire to continue his Colorado Springs lifestyle with Jessica, rather than any legitimate work obligations. The ease with which he fabricated additional lies, even after 10 weeks of systematic deception, demonstrated that he viewed our marriage as an inconvenience to be managed, rather than a relationship deserving honesty and respect. I managed to respond appropriately to his call, asking expected questions about his work and expressing appropriate concern about his extended absence, but the conversation felt like participating in theater rather than communicating with my husband. The performance was necessary to prevent David from realizing his surveillance detection while I consulted with attorneys and prepared legal strategies, but it was emotionally exhausting to maintain the pretense of trust and concern. Monday morning would bring my first consultation with Patricia Williams, a divorce attorney who specialized in complex asset division cases and had successfully represented clients in situations involving systematic financial deception. The appointment represented the beginning of legal proceedings that would formalize the end of my marriage, but it also marked the start of a process that would protect my children's financial security and my own future independence. As I prepared for bed Sunday night, I reflected on the 10 weeks since David's departure and how completely my understanding of our relationship had changed. What had begun as concern about inconsistencies in his communication had evolved into documented evidence of comprehensive betrayal that extended far beyond simple marital infidelity. David had constructed an alternate life that required systematic lying to his family, financial fraud against our joint resources, and emotional manipulation of our children's trust and expectations. The surveillance evidence had provided answers to my questions about David's actual activities, but it had also raised new concerns about his character and his fitness as a father. His willingness to deceive Emma and Jake for months while pursuing his own happiness suggested a level of selfishness that would affect custody arrangements and future co-parenting relationships. The legal proceedings ahead would need to address not only financial and property issues, but also the impact of David's behavior on our children's emotional well-being and security. The knowledge that David was living happily with Jessica while I struggled with single parenting and financial stress was painful, but it was also clarifying in terms of my priorities and decision-making process. I could no longer focus on saving our marriage or understanding David's motivations, because his actions had demonstrated that our relationship had ended months ago when he began planning his Colorado Springs escape. My energy needed to be directed toward protecting my children and building a foundation for our future without him. Patricia Williams' law office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian mansion in downtown Riverside, its elegant conference room overlooking the mountain peaks that had once represented stability and permanence in my life. Now those same mountains seemed to mock the illusion of security I'd maintained while David systematically dismantled our marriage from his secret Colorado Springs headquarters. Patricia herself was a formidable woman in her early 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of marital deception during her 20-year career, specializing in complex divorce cases. The surveillance evidence spread across Patricia's mahogany conference table created a visual timeline of betrayal that was even more damning in the formal legal setting. Each photograph and financial document represented potential evidence in divorce proceedings that would determine not only the division of our assets but also the custody arrangements that would shape Emma and Jake's relationship with their father for years to come. Patricia studied each piece of evidence methodically, occasionally making notes on her legal pad while asking precise questions about timelines and my knowledge of David's financial activities. Mrs. Mitchell, Patricia began after reviewing Robert Chen's complete investigative report. Your husband has engaged in what we call dissipation of marital assets, which is a form of financial misconduct that courts take very seriously. His systematic diversion of funds to support a secret residence and lifestyle in Colorado Springs, combined with his relationship with a divorce attorney who could advise him about asset protection strategies, suggests that he's been preparing for divorce while deliberately keeping you unaware of his intentions. Her assessment confirmed my worst fears while also providing a framework for understanding David's behavior in legal terms that would be relevant to divorce proceedings. Patricia explained that Colorado law required full financial disclosure during divorce proceedings, and David's concealment of assets and establishment of separate financial infrastructure would constitute fraud that could significantly impact how our property would be divided and whether he would be required to pay spousal support. The relationship with Jessica Martinez was particularly problematic from a legal standpoint, not because romantic relationships during separation were inherently illegal, but because Jessica's expertise in divorce law created ethical complications if she had provided David with advice about concealing assets or manipulating the legal process. Patricia would need to investigate whether Jessica had violated professional ethics rules by assisting David in activities that could be considered fraudulent or deceptive. More immediately concerning was the possibility that David's establishment of Colorado Springs residency was part of a strategy to file for divorce in that jurisdiction rather than in our home county in Colorado. Different jurisdictions had varying laws about property division, spousal support, and custody arrangements, and David's choice of where to establish legal residency could significantly impact the terms of our divorce settlement. Patricia would need to act quickly to establish legal proceedings in Riverside before David could file in Colorado Springs. The custody implications of David's behavior were complex and troubling. While his romantic relationship with Jessica wouldn't necessarily affect his parental rights, his willingness to systematically deceive Emma and Jake about his location and activities for months raised serious questions about his judgment and his commitment to maintaining honest relationships with his children. The emotional manipulation involved in his nightly phone calls, where he pretended to miss his family while actually enjoying his new life with Jessica, demonstrated a capacity for psychological manipulation that family courts would consider when determining custody arrangements. Patricia recommended an aggressive legal strategy that would leverage David's misconduct to protect my financial interests and ensure favorable custody terms. The first step would be filing for divorce immediately in our home jurisdiction, accompanied by temporary restraining orders that would prevent David from accessing our joint accounts or disposing of marital assets. The element of surprise would be crucial for preventing further financial damage and ensuring that David couldn't implement whatever exit strategy he'd been developing with Jessica's guidance. The financial analysis Patricia conducted based on Robert's evidence was sobering and infuriating. David's Colorado Springs lifestyle was costing approximately $4,000 per month, beyond his legitimate living expenses, money that should have been supporting our children's current needs and future education costs. His expenditures on recreational activities, dining, and entertainment with Jessica exceeded our family's entire discretionary budget in Riverside, meaning that his pursuit of personal happiness was directly undermining our children's opportunities and security. More troubling was Patricia's discovery that David had been gradually shifting assets into accounts and investments that would be difficult to trace or recover during divorce proceedings. His meetings with financial advisors in Colorado Springs had apparently focused on strategies for protecting wealth from potential claims by his wife, a level of premeditation that would support allegations of fraud and misconduct in divorce court. The timeline Patricia constructed from the available evidence suggested that David's deception had been developing for at least a year before his supposed Denver project began. His gradual withdrawal from family activities, his increasing criticism of Riverside's limitations, and his growing secrecy about financial matters had apparently been preparation for the alternate life he was now living with Jessica. The systematic nature of his planning demonstrated that his dissatisfaction with our marriage had been profound and long-standing, even while he continued to participate in family activities and intimate relationships that I'd believed were genuine. Patricia's investigation into Jessica Martinez revealed additional complications that could affect our divorce proceedings. Jessica specialized in representing high-net-worth individuals in contentious divorce cases, with particular expertise in asset protection and custody disputes involving allegations of parental misconduct. Her professional background would have provided David with sophisticated knowledge about divorce strategies that most people wouldn't possess, giving him significant advantages in planning his deception and preparing for legal proceedings. The ethical implications of Jessica's relationship with David while potentially advising him about divorce strategies were serious enough that Patricia planned to file complaints with the Colorado Bar Association about possible professional misconduct. If Jessica had provided David with legal advice while maintaining a romantic relationship with him, she could face disciplinary action that might also impact the admissibility of evidence in our divorce case. Patricia outlined a timeline for legal action that would maximize our strategic advantages, while minimizing David's ability to cause further financial damage or manipulate custody proceedings. The divorce petition would be filed within the week, accompanied by temporary orders that would freeze our joint assets and establish temporary custody arrangements based on David's current absence from our children's daily lives. The goal was to establish legal control over the situation before David realized his deception had been discovered and could implement countermeasures. The custody strategy Patricia recommended would focus on David's systematic deception and emotional manipulation of Emma and Jake, rather than his romantic relationship with Jessica. His willingness to lie to his children for months about his location and activities demonstrated questionable judgment that family courts would consider when determining what custody arrangements would serve the children's best interests. The psychological impact of discovering their father's extensive deception would also be relevant to custody decisions, and potentially to requirements for family counseling or supervised visitation. Financial discovery would be aggressive and comprehensive, designed to uncover all of David's assets and income sources regardless of his attempts at concealment. Patricia had experience with forensic accountants who specialized in tracing hidden assets and reconstructing financial histories in complex divorce cases. The evidence Robert had gathered would provide the foundation for subpoenas and court orders that would force David to disclose his complete financial situation. Patricia also recommended hiring a child psychologist to evaluate the impact of David's deception on Emma and Jake's emotional well-being, and to provide recommendations about how to minimize psychological damage during the divorce process. The children would eventually need to understand why their father had been lying about his location and activities, and professional guidance would be essential for helping them process their feelings about his betrayal without damaging their long-term relationship with him. The strategy session with Patricia lasted 3 hours, covering everything from immediate protective measures to long-term financial planning for single parenthood. Her confidence and expertise provided reassurance that my legal interests would be protected, but the scope of the proceedings she described was overwhelming and emotionally exhausting. The next several months would involve intensive legal battles that would expose the most private aspects of our marriage while determining the future structure of our family. As our meeting concluded, Patricia assigned tasks that would begin immediately. I would need to gather additional financial documents, change passwords on all our accounts, and document any communications with David that might be relevant to proving his deception. Most importantly, I would need to prepare Emma and Jake for the revelation that their father had been lying about his location and activities, because the legal proceedings would make his deception impossible to conceal much longer. The drive home from Patricia's office felt like traveling toward a battlefield where I would be fighting for my children's future and my own financial security against a husband who had spent months preparing for exactly this conflict. David's strategic advantages, including his relationship with Jessica and his knowledge of legal procedures, would make the divorce proceedings complex and contentious. However, his systematic deception and asset concealment had provided me with evidence of misconduct that Patricia believed would ultimately work in my favor. That evening, while Emma and Jake worked on homework at our kitchen table, I began the process of securing our financial accounts and gathering documents that would support the divorce petition. Each action felt like dismantling the infrastructure of our family life, but I knew that David had already destroyed our marriage through his deception, and that my responsibility now was protecting our children's interests and future security. David's phone call that night carried new significance as I listened to his continued lies about the Denver project while knowing he was actually calling from his apartment with Jessica. His casual tone and fabricated updates about construction delays represented a level of psychological manipulation that I found deeply disturbing now that I understood the true scope of his deception. The ease with which he lied to Emma and Jake about missing them and working hard for their future demonstrated a capacity for emotional abuse that I'd never recognized during our marriage. When Emma mentioned that her friend's father had returned early from a business trip to attend her birthday party, David's response was telling in its dismissiveness and irritation. He claimed that his project responsibilities were more critical than other people's work situations, and that Emma should understand that his absence was necessary for their family's financial security. The manipulation involved in making our daughter feel guilty for missing him while he was actually choosing to prioritize his relationship with Jessica was particularly cruel. After the children went to bed, I spent the evening researching David's recent credit card activity and bank statements, documenting evidence of his Colorado Springs lifestyle that would support Patricia's financial discovery efforts. The pattern of expenditures painted a picture of someone enjoying recreational activities and romantic dinners, while his family managed household expenses and financial stress alone. His spending on gifts for Jessica exceeded what he'd spent on my birthday and our anniversary combined, highlighting how completely his emotional priorities had shifted. The evidence-gathering process was emotionally devastating, but also empowering, providing concrete documentation of David's betrayal that would support legal arguments about his fitness as a parent and his fraudulent concealment of assets. Each receipt and bank statement represented choices he'd made to prioritize his personal happiness over his family's needs and security. Tuesday morning brought a call from Robert Chen with additional surveillance information that would strengthen our legal position. His continued observation of David's activities had documented weekend trips that David and Jessica had taken together, including expensive resort visits that were being funded with money diverted from our joint accounts. The trips demonstrated that David's deception extended beyond maintaining a separate residence to actively financing romantic getaways, while claiming financial stress from his unpaid Denver project assignment. More significantly, Robert had observed meetings between David and additional legal professionals, suggesting that he was building a comprehensive legal team to support his divorce strategy. The meetings included a forensic accountant and a custody evaluator, indicating that David was preparing for contentious divorce proceedings while still maintaining the fiction of his Denver business trip. His level of preparation suggested that he planned to file for divorce soon, possibly as early as the end of the summer when his supposed project was scheduled to conclude. The intelligence about David's legal preparations reinforced Patricia's recommendation for immediate action, rather than waiting to gather additional evidence. David's team of professionals would begin working to protect his interests and minimize his financial obligations as soon as he filed for divorce, making it crucial that our legal protections were in place first. The element of surprise was our primary strategic advantage, and that advantage would disappear once David realized his deception had been discovered. Robert's surveillance had also documented David's social integration into Colorado Springs' professional community, including his attendance at networking events, and business association meetings. His participation in these activities suggested that he viewed his Colorado Springs residence as permanent rather than temporary, supporting arguments that his supposed Denver project had been fabricated to conceal his actual plans for relocating and ending our marriage. The investigation had revealed that David's deception was even more extensive than originally suspected, involving not just asset concealment and romantic infidelity, but systematic preparation for divorce proceedings designed to minimize his obligations to our family. His relationship with Jessica provided him with professional legal advice, while his gradual asset shifting and residency establishment created strategic advantages that most divorcing spouses wouldn't possess. Wednesday morning brought the filing of our divorce petition, accompanied by temporary restraining orders that froze David's access to our joint accounts and established preliminary custody arrangements based on his current absence from our children's lives. Patricia had crafted the legal documents to maximize the impact of David's misconduct while establishing protective measures that would prevent further financial damage during the proceedings. The service of divorce papers would occur Thursday morning at David's Colorado Springs apartment, ensuring that he would be surprised by the legal action and unable to implement countermeasures before our protective orders took effect. Patricia had coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure that the service would be documented and that David couldn't claim he hadn't received the legal notice. The timing of the service was calculated to occur when David would be at the apartment with Jessica, ensuring that his romantic relationship would be witnessed and documented as part of the legal record. While romantic relationships during separation weren't illegal, the documentation would support arguments about David's priorities and his emotional availability for co-parenting responsibilities during the divorce process. Wednesday evening brought the difficult conversation I'd been dreading with Emma and Jake about their father's deception in our upcoming divorce. I'd consulted with the child psychologist Patricia recommended about how to present the information in age-appropriate terms that would minimize psychological damage, while preparing them for the changes ahead. The conversation was heartbreaking but necessary, as the legal proceedings would make David's lies impossible to conceal much longer. Emma's reaction was a mixture of confusion and anger, her 12-year-old mind struggling to understand why her father would lie about his location and activities for months. She asked direct questions about whether David had been with another woman and whether he still loved our family, questions that required careful answers that balanced honesty with emotional protection. Her sense of betrayal was visible and painful to witness, but I knew that learning the truth from me in a supportive environment was better than discovering it through legal proceedings or community gossip. Jake's response was quieter but equally troubled, his 9-year-old perspective focusing on whether David's lies meant he didn't want to be their father anymore. I assured both children that David's poor choices about honesty didn't change his love for them, but that adults sometimes make decisions that hurt their families, even when they don't intend to cause pain. The conversation was emotionally exhausting but important for beginning the process of helping them understand that the divorce was about David's choices, rather than anything they had done wrong. The children's questions about our family's future were difficult to answer, because the divorce proceedings would determine custody arrangements, financial support, and living situations that couldn't be predicted with certainty. I focused on assuring them that they would continue to have relationships with both parents, and that our home in Riverside would remain stable regardless of the legal outcomes. Their immediate concerns centered on practical issues like whether they would have to change schools, and whether David would still attend their activities and events. Thursday morning brought news from Patricia that the divorce papers had been successfully served at David's Colorado Springs apartment, with Jessica present as a witness to his reaction. The process server reported that David appeared shocked and angry, claiming that he'd been planning to discuss separation issues with me when his Denver project concluded. His immediate response involved calling multiple lawyers and financial advisors, suggesting that he was implementing the legal strategy he'd been developing rather than genuinely surprised by the divorce filing. David's first communication with me after being served was a furious phone call demanding to know how I'd discovered his Colorado Springs residence, and whether I'd been having him followed. His anger and sense of betrayal were ironic, given that he'd been systematically deceiving our family for months, but his reaction confirmed that he'd believed his deception was undetectable, and that he controlled the timeline for revealing his true activities and intentions. The conversation was brief and hostile, with David making threats about fighting for custody and claiming that my hiring of a private investigator demonstrated vindictive behavior that would affect court decisions about our children's welfare. His immediate shift to legal intimidation tactics suggested that he'd been preparing for contentious divorce proceedings and viewed our marriage dissolution as a battle to be won, rather than a relationship to be concluded with mutual respect. Patricia advised me to document all communications with David and to avoid responding to his accusations or threats outside of formal legal channels. His emotional volatility and immediate shift to adversarial behavior would be relevant to custody determinations, particularly given the contrast with his months of calculated deception and manipulation. The divorce proceedings would reveal whether David's apparent anger was genuine emotional response or another strategic performance designed to influence legal outcomes. The financial protective orders had immediate impact, preventing David from accessing our joint accounts or making large expenditures that could further dissipate marital assets. Patricia's forensic accountant began the process of tracing all financial transactions over the past year, working to recover money that David had diverted to support his Colorado Springs lifestyle, and to ensure that all marital assets would be properly identified and divided according to Colorado law. The custody evaluation process began with interviews and psychological assessments designed to determine what arrangements would best serve Emma and Jake's interests during and after the divorce. The evaluator would consider David's systematic deception, his emotional manipulation of the children during his supposed business trip, and his demonstrated willingness to prioritize his personal relationships over his parental responsibilities when making recommendations about custody schedules and decision-making authority. As the first week of formal divorce proceedings concluded, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since discovering David's lies about his Denver project. What had begun as concern about inconsistencies in his communication had evolved into documented evidence of comprehensive betrayal that would reshape our family structure permanently. The legal battle ahead would be challenging and emotionally difficult, but I felt confident that Patricia's aggressive strategy would protect my children's interests and ensure that David's misconduct would have appropriate consequences. The weekend brought an opportunity to establish new routines with Emma and Jake that didn't revolve around waiting for David's phone calls or managing their disappointment when he failed to keep promises about virtual participation in their activities. For the first time in months, we planned weekend activities based on our own interests and schedules, rather than accommodating David's fictional work obligations and supposed availability for family communication. The liberation of living honestly without maintaining the fiction of David's Denver project or pretending that our marriage was intact was both relieving and terrifying. The future was uncertain and would depend on legal outcomes that couldn't be predicted with confidence, but at least our daily life was no longer built on elaborate lies and systematic deception. Emma and Jake were processing their father's betrayal with the resilience that children possess, and with professional support and honest communication, I believed they would emerge from the divorce experience with their emotional health intact. The strategic phase of our response to David's deception was complete, with legal protections in place and a comprehensive plan for pursuing divorce proceedings that would hold him accountable for his misconduct, while protecting our family's financial security and the children's emotional well-being. The next phase would involve the actual legal battle, where David's months of preparation and his relationship with Jessica would be tested against the evidence of his deception and the protective measures Patricia had implemented on our behalf. The confrontation I'd been preparing for arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly 7 months after David had kissed me goodbye in our driveway while secretly planning to abandon our family for his Colorado Springs fantasy. The setting was the Riverside Country Club's annual charity auction, an event David and I had attended together for 12 consecutive years, where he'd built professional relationships, and I'd volunteered countless hours organizing fundraising activities. This year, I would be attending alone, armed with knowledge that would finally expose his elaborate deception to our entire community. Patricia Williams had strategically chosen the charity auction as the venue for David's public reckoning, understanding that his professional reputation and social standing were the assets he valued most after our financial accounts had been frozen and his hidden Colorado Springs life exposed through legal discovery. The auction attracted Riverside's business elite, including David's former colleagues at Blue Mountain Construction, potential clients for his future consulting work, and families whose children attended school with Emma and Jake. His appearance at the event, with Jessica as his date, would provide the perfect opportunity to deliver evidence that would shatter his carefully maintained image as a dedicated family man forced into difficult circumstances by work obligations. The legal proceedings had progressed rapidly over the past 3 months, with Patricia's aggressive discovery process uncovering the full scope of David's financial deception and strategic planning for divorce. Forensic accounting had revealed that David had systematically diverted nearly $200,000 from our joint accounts over the past 18 months. Money that had funded not only his Colorado Springs apartment and lifestyle, but also a sophisticated asset protection scheme designed to shield his resources from divorce settlement obligations. His meetings with financial advisors and legal professionals had produced a comprehensive strategy for minimizing spousal support, maximizing his custody rights, and protecting the business assets he'd accumulated during our marriage. The custody evaluation had concluded with recommendations that strongly favored my position, citing David's systematic deception of Emma and Jake, his emotional manipulation during months of fabricated phone calls, and his demonstrated willingness to prioritize personal relationships over parental responsibilities. The court-appointed psychologist had been particularly critical of David's ability to maintain elaborate lies while participating in family activities, describing his behavior as indicative of narcissistic tendencies that could negatively impact his children's emotional development and security. Emma and Jake had adapted to our new reality with remarkable resilience, though both children showed signs of trust issues that would require ongoing counseling to address fully. Emma had become more independent and skeptical of adult promises, while Jake had developed anxiety about family stability that manifested in questions about whether I might also disappear unexpectedly. Their relationship with David had been permanently altered by the revelation of his deception, though they continued to see him during court-ordered supervised visitation that ensured his influence couldn't undermine their emotional healing process. The financial settlement negotiations had been contentious and complex, with David's legal team attempting to argue that his Colorado Springs expenses represented legitimate business development costs rather than personal lifestyle choices funded with marital assets. Patricia's evidence of his romantic relationship with Jessica, combined with documentation of recreational activities and entertainment expenses, had systematically dismantled these arguments while establishing clear patterns of asset dissipation that violated his fiduciary obligations as a married partner. Jessica Martinez had faced professional consequences for her role in David's deception, with the Colorado Bar Association launching an investigation into whether her romantic relationship with him while providing divorce strategy advice constituted ethical violations. Her law practice had suffered reputational damage when news of the relationship became public through court filings, and several clients had terminated their representation after learning about her personal involvement with someone actively deceiving his family. The irony of a divorce attorney becoming romantically involved with a married client while helping him conceal assets was not lost on the legal community or local media coverage of our proceedings. Robert Chen's surveillance evidence had proven invaluable during discovery, with his photographs and financial documentation providing irrefutable proof of David's systematic lying and asset concealment. His professional testimony during depositions had established clear timelines for David's deception, while highlighting the premeditation involved in establishing his Colorado Springs residence and financial infrastructure. The surveillance materials had also revealed David's complete social integration into his new community, including professional networking and recreational activities that contradicted his claims about missing his family and working toward reconciliation. The charity auction represented more than just a public venue for exposing David's deception. It symbolized the community relationships and professional reputation he'd been protecting through his elaborate lies. His decision to attend the event with Jessica demonstrated either breathtaking arrogance or complete disconnection from how his behavior had affected his standing in Riverside's close-knit business and social community. Either way, his appearance would provide the perfect opportunity to deliver justice in front of the people whose opinions he valued most. I arrived at the country club wearing a navy dress that projected confidence and dignity, carrying a leather portfolio containing copies of the surveillance photographs, financial documents, and custody evaluation findings that told the complete story of David's betrayal. My hair was styled professionally and my makeup carefully applied to project strength rather than victimhood, because tonight I would be revealing truth rather than seeking sympathy or support from our community. The ballroom buzzed with the familiar energy of Riverside's annual social gathering, with auction items displayed around the perimeter and cocktail tables arranged to encourage networking and conversation. I recognized most of the attendees from years of shared community activities, school events, and business functions, where David and I had appeared as the successful couple building a life together in Colorado's mountain community. Tonight, many of these same people would learn that our marriage had been a carefully maintained fiction designed to conceal David's systematic planning for abandonment and betrayal. Karen Williams, my neighbor whose husband had first raised questions about David's supposed Denver project, approached me immediately upon my arrival. "Sarah," she said quietly, reaching for my arm with genuine concern, "how are you holding up through all of this? The whole neighborhood has been talking about David's situation, and we're all amazed by how strong you've been while dealing with everything alone." Her words reminded me that news of our divorce proceedings had spread throughout Riverside's interconnected community, though most people knew only the basic facts about David's Colorado Springs residence and romantic relationship with Jessica. They didn't yet understand the full scope of his deception, the systematic financial fraud, or the elaborate lies he'd maintained while pretending to work in Denver. Tonight would provide complete clarity about the man they'd respected as a dedicated father and successful businessman. I thanked Karen for her support and explained that I'd be sharing some important information about David's activities during the evening. Information that would help our friends and neighbors understand what had really happened during his supposed business trip. Her curiosity was obvious, but I indicated that she would need to wait for the appropriate moment when I could address everyone simultaneously rather than repeating the story multiple times throughout the evening. The auction's silent bidding phase provided an opportunity to circulate through the crowd, greeting friends and acquaintances while positioning myself strategically for David's arrival. I bid on several items that supported causes Emma and Jake cared about, maintaining my involvement in community activities that had always been important to our family despite the personal turmoil of the past months. My participation in the auction demonstrated that I intended to remain an active member of Riverside's community regardless of David's choices and their consequences. David's entrance with Jessica created an immediate stir of whispered conversations and uncomfortable glances from attendees who recognized the awkwardness of his bringing another woman to an event where he'd appeared with me for over a decade. Jessica wore an elegant black cocktail dress and expensive jewelry that had likely been purchased with money diverted from our joint accounts, though she seemed nervous and uncomfortable under the scrutiny of Riverside's social establishment. Her presence at David's side was a calculated statement about their relationship status, but it also demonstrated poor judgment about community dynamics and social appropriateness. David himself appeared confident and relaxed, greeting former colleagues and business associates with his characteristic charm and professional demeanor. His behavior suggested that he believed his divorce proceedings were a private matter that wouldn't affect his standing in Riverside's business community, or that his version of events had successfully portrayed him as the victim of an unreasonable wife who couldn't accept his career advancement opportunities. His casual interactions with people who'd known our family for years showed complete disconnection from how his systematic deception had damaged his reputation and credibility. I observed David and Jessica from across the ballroom for 30 minutes, watching him work the crowd with practiced ease while she struggled to engage with people who knew her only as the other woman who'd participated in destroying a well-regarded marriage. His comfort in the social setting contrasted sharply with her obvious discomfort, highlighting the different stakes they each had in maintaining acceptance within Riverside's established community. The auction's live bidding phase provided the perfect opportunity for my planned revelation, as attendees would be seated at tables, with their attention focused on the front of the ballroom where I could address the entire gathering simultaneously. I'd coordinated with the auction organizers to speak during the intermission between auction segments, ostensibly to thank volunteers and sponsors, but actually to deliver information that would permanently alter David's standing in our community. When the auctioneer called for the intermission, I approached the podium with my leather portfolio, surveying the familiar faces of friends and neighbors who'd supported our family through years of school activities, community projects, and social gatherings. David sat at a prominent table near the front of the ballroom, his arm casually draped around Jessica's chair in a display of ownership that would make my revelations even more impactful for the audience. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "As many of you know, I've been actively involved in organizing this auction for several years, and I've always appreciated how our community comes together to support important causes. Tonight, I'd like to share some information that will help you understand why my participation in community activities has become even more meaningful to me during this challenging time." The audience settled into attentive silence, sensing that my remarks would address the elephant in the room regarding David's presence with Jessica and our ongoing divorce proceedings. I could see David's expression shifting from casual attention to growing alarm, as he realized I was planning to address our personal situation publicly, rather than maintaining the discreet silence he'd apparently expected. "7 months ago," I continued, "my husband David told me he was leaving for an extended business trip to Denver to manage a critical construction project. Like many of you, I believe that dedication to work sometimes requires personal sacrifice, and I supported what I thought was his commitment to providing for our family's future. I managed our household alone, helped Emma and Jake cope with missing their father, and made financial adjustments to accommodate his reduced income during what he claimed was unpaid project management work." The ballroom remained completely silent as I paused to open my portfolio and remove the first set of surveillance photographs. David's face had gone pale as he realized the scope of what I was preparing to reveal, while Jessica appeared to be sinking into her chair as she understood that her role in the deception was about to be exposed to Riverside's entire social establishment. "What I discovered 3 months later," I said, holding up the photographs so they were visible to the audience, "was that David had never been working on any Denver project. Instead, he had established a permanent residence in Colorado Springs, where he was living with his girlfriend Jessica Martinez, a divorce attorney who was helping him conceal assets and plan his exit from our marriage, while I continued to believe he was working hard to support our family." The gasps and murmurs from the audience were audible and immediate, with heads turning toward David's table as people processed the implications of my revelation. Some attendees appeared shocked by the scope of the deception, while others seemed to be connecting dots about inconsistencies they'd noticed but hadn't previously understood. David had stood up from his table and was moving toward the exit, apparently planning to leave rather than face the community's reaction to the evidence I was presenting. "The financial analysis our forensic accountant conducted," I continued, raising my voice to ensure David could hear me even as he attempted to flee, revealed that he had systematically stolen nearly $200,000 from our joint accounts to fund his secret lifestyle, money that should have been supporting Emma and Jake's education and our family's future security. While I worried about paying for orthodontics and summer camps, David was financing romantic getaways and expensive recreational activities with Jessica using money he'd taken from his children's college funds. David had reached the ballroom exit but stopped when security personnel, whom Patricia had arranged to be present, blocked his departure and requested that he remain for the conclusion of my remarks. His attempt to leave had only reinforced the accuracy of my accusations, while demonstrating his unwillingness to face accountability for his choices and their impact on our family and community. "The custody evaluation," I said, removing additional documents from my portfolio, "found that David's systematic deception and emotional manipulation of our children during months of fabricated phone calls demonstrated questionable judgment and narcissistic tendencies that could harm Emma and Jake's emotional development. The court psychologist recommended supervised visitation to ensure that David's influence on our children would be monitored and limited until he could demonstrate genuine commitment to honest communication and responsible parenting." Jessica had also attempted to leave but was similarly prevented by security, her face flushed with embarrassment as the audience stared at the woman who'd participated in deceiving a family and defrauding children of their financial security. Her professional reputation in Colorado's legal community would be permanently damaged by the public exposure of her role in David's systematic deception, and her presence at the auction had provided perfect documentation of her willingness to flaunt her relationship with a married man in front of his children's community. "The surveillance evidence we gathered," I continued, "documented that David and Jessica had been living as a couple for over 8 months, during which time he participated in our family activities, attended school conferences, and celebrated holidays while secretly planning his abandonment of his wife and children. His ability to maintain intimate relationships with me while building a new life with Jessica demonstrates a capacity for psychological manipulation that extends far beyond simple marital infidelity. The audience was completely silent now, absorbing the full scope of David's betrayal, while watching him stand trapped near the exit with Jessica beside him. Their body language showed panic and humiliation as they realized that their Colorado Springs lifestyle and romantic relationship had been thoroughly documented and exposed to the people whose opinions mattered most for David's future business prospects and social standing in Colorado's mountain communities. The legal proceedings have resulted in a settlement that protects Emma and Jake's financial security while holding David accountable for his theft of marital assets and systematic deception of our family, I said, preparing to conclude my remarks with the information that would have the most lasting impact on David's reputation and future opportunities. However, I wanted our community to understand the full truth about his character and his choices, because many of you have business relationships with David or might consider working with him in the future. The business implications of my revelation were immediately apparent to the audience, as David's professional success had depended largely on his reputation for integrity and reliability within Riverside's interconnected business community. His systematic lying and financial deception would make him unsuitable for positions requiring trust or fiduciary responsibility, while his demonstrated willingness to prioritize personal interests over family obligations would raise questions about his commitment to professional relationships and business partnerships. As I returned to my seat, the ballroom erupted in conversations as friends and neighbors processed the information I'd shared while staring at David and Jessica near the exit. Some people appeared angry about the deception that had affected one of their community's families, while others seemed amazed by the scope and duration of David's elaborate lies. The consensus was clearly that David's behavior had violated community standards and values that emphasized honesty, family commitment, and personal integrity. David finally managed to leave the ballroom with Jessica, but their departure was witnessed by everyone present and provided visual confirmation of their relationship, while demonstrating their unwillingness to face accountability for their choices. Their exit also ensured that they couldn't present alternative versions of events or attempt to minimize the scope of David's deception and its impact on our family. The remainder of the auction proceeded with subdued energy as attendees continued discussing my revelations and their implications for David's future in Riverside's business and social community. Several people approached me to express support and admiration for my strength in exposing the truth, while others shared stories about inconsistencies they'd noticed in David's behavior but hadn't understood at the time. The community response confirmed that David's professional reputation and social standing had been permanently damaged by the public exposure of his systematic deception. Michael Torres, David's former supervisor at Blue Mountain Construction, approached me during the auction's conclusion to express his shock about the evidence I'd presented. "Sarah," he said quietly, shaking his head in disbelief, "we all respected David's work ethic and integrity. If we'd known he was capable of this level of deception, we never would have recommended him for projects requiring financial oversight or client trust. His professional references are going to be seriously compromised by what you've revealed tonight." His comments highlighted the business consequences of David's behavior, as his future employment opportunities would be limited by his demonstrated willingness to engage in systematic deception and financial misconduct. The construction industry relied heavily on professional relationships and reputation-based referrals, making David's exposed character flaws particularly damaging for his career prospects and earning potential. Patricia Williams, who had attended the auction to observe David's reaction to the public exposure, approached me as the event concluded to discuss the evening's impact on our ongoing legal proceedings. The public nature of David's humiliation and the community's negative response to his behavior would strengthen our position in final settlement negotiations, as his professional reputation and future earning capacity had been significantly damaged by the exposure of his systematic deception. More importantly, Patricia explained, David's attempt to flee the ballroom rather than face accountability for his choices demonstrated the continued poor judgment and lack of personal responsibility that would support our arguments about supervised custody and limited decision-making authority regarding Emma and Jake's welfare. His behavior during the auction had provided additional evidence of character flaws that family courts would consider when determining what arrangements would best serve our children's interests. The drive home from the country club felt like completing a journey that had begun 7 months earlier, when I discovered inconsistencies in David's communication about his supposed Denver project. The public exposure of his deception had provided emotional closure while ensuring that our community understood the truth about his character and choices. David would no longer be able to present himself as the victim of an unreasonable wife or minimize the scope of his betrayal and its impact on our family. Emma and Jake were spending the weekend with my sister Amanda in Phoenix, giving me time to process the evening's events and prepare for the final phases of our divorce proceedings. Their absence also ensured that they wouldn't be affected by any immediate community reaction to my public revelation, though they would eventually benefit from living in a community that understood their father's behavior, rather than questioning why their family had dissolved. Sunday morning brought news from Patricia that David had contacted her office requesting an immediate meeting to discuss settlement terms, apparently recognizing that his public humiliation had significantly weakened his negotiating position and future prospects. His willingness to accelerate final agreements suggested that he understood the long-term consequences of the community exposure and wanted to minimize further damage to his reputation and professional opportunities. The final settlement negotiations concluded within 2 weeks, with David accepting terms that were significantly more favorable to Emma, Jake, and me than his previous offers had suggested. His agreement to enhance spousal support, comprehensive asset disclosure, and continued supervised visitation reflected his recognition that fighting our demands would only result in additional public exposure of his misconduct and further damage to his already compromised reputation. Jessica Martinez's professional consequences became apparent when news reports revealed that the Colorado Bar Association had imposed disciplinary sanctions for her ethical violations in providing divorce strategy advice while maintaining a romantic relationship with David. Her law practice lost several major clients, and her professional reputation was permanently damaged by her role in systematic financial deception and asset concealment that had harmed a family and violated legal ethics standards. The completion of our divorce proceedings 6 weeks later marked the official end of a marriage that had actually concluded months earlier when David began planning his Colorado Springs escape. The final decree provided financial security for Emma, Jake, and me, while establishing custody arrangements that prioritized our children's emotional welfare over David's desires for unrestricted access to them. His supervised visitation would continue until he could demonstrate genuine commitment to honest communication and responsible parenting behavior. Robert Chin's final investigative report documented the complete scope of David's deception, including financial transactions, timeline analysis, and photographic evidence that would be preserved for potential future legal proceedings. His professional work had provided the foundation for protecting our family's interests, while ensuring that David's misconduct would have appropriate legal and financial consequences that matched the severity of his systematic betrayal. The holiday season brought opportunities to establish new family traditions with Emma and Jake that didn't revolve around accommodating David's fictional work obligations or managing their disappointment when he failed to keep promises about participation in family activities. For the first time in months, we planned celebrations based on our own interests and schedules, rather than maintaining the elaborate fiction that had characterized the final months of our marriage. Emma's relationship with her father remained complicated and would require years of counseling to address fully, but she demonstrated remarkable maturity and understanding that his choices reflected his character rather than her worth as a daughter. Her trust issues would need ongoing attention, but she showed signs of resilience and independence that would serve her well as she navigated adolescence and young adulthood. Jake's anxiety about family stability gradually improved as our new routines became established, and he realized that my presence and commitment to our family were reliable and permanent. His relationship with David during supervised visits was polite but distant, reflecting his understanding that his father had chosen personal happiness over family loyalty and honesty. The impact of David's deception on his son's ability to trust male authority figures would require careful attention, as Jake developed his own sense of integrity and responsibility. The community response to David's exposed deception had lasting consequences for his business opportunities and social relationships in Colorado's mountain region. Several construction companies rescinded job offers after learning about his financial misconduct and systematic lying, while professional associations questioned his membership based on character concerns that affected the industry's reputation and standards. My own professional opportunities expanded as environmental consulting clients expressed confidence in working with someone who had demonstrated integrity and strength during personal crisis. The consulting practice I'd maintained part-time during our marriage grew into full-time work that provided both financial independence and personal satisfaction from contributing meaningfully to environmental protection and community development projects. 6 months after the charity auction, David and Jessica's relationship had reportedly ended, with Jessica relocating to Denver to rebuild her legal career away from the Colorado Springs community, where their romance had been exposed as part of systematic family deception. David remained in Colorado Springs but struggled to establish professional credibility and social connections after his public humiliation and the business community's reaction to evidence of his character flaws. The anniversary of David's departure for his supposed Denver project provided an opportunity to reflect on how completely our lives had changed through his choices and their consequences. What had begun as concern about inconsistencies in his communication had evolved into documented evidence of comprehensive betrayal that revealed fundamental character flaws and priorities that made him unsuitable as a husband and questionable as a father. Emma and Jake had adapted to our new reality with remarkable resilience, though both children showed lasting effects of their father's systematic deception that would require ongoing professional support to address fully. Their ability to maintain relationships with friends whose families had witnessed David's public exposure demonstrated their strength and the community's commitment to supporting children affected by their parents' poor choices. The financial settlement had provided security that allowed us to remain in our Riverside home, while ensuring that Emma and Jake's educational opportunities would not be compromised by David's theft of marital assets. The recovered funds, combined with my expanded consulting income, created a stable foundation for building our future without dependence on David's contributions or reliability. Most importantly, our daily life was now based on honesty and authentic relationships, rather than the elaborate fiction that had characterized the final months of our marriage. The liberation of living truthfully, without maintaining David's carefully constructed lies, or managing the children's confusion about his unexplained absence, had restored peace and stability that we hadn't experienced during his supposed Denver project. The legal and emotional closure provided by David's public exposure and our divorce settlement allowed us to focus on building positive future experiences rather than processing ongoing deception and betrayal. His systematic lies and financial fraud had caused significant damage, but they had also revealed his true character in ways that protected us from investing additional years in a relationship built on manipulation and deceit. The investigation that had begun with simple questions about David's supposed business trip had ultimately exposed a level of deception that few people would have imagined possible from someone they trusted and respected. His ability to maintain elaborate lies while participating in intimate family relationships demonstrated psychological capabilities that made him dangerous to our emotional and financial welfare. The community's reaction to evidence of David's systematic deception had provided validation that our values and expectations about honesty, family commitment, and personal integrity were shared by people whose opinions mattered for our long-term residence in Riverside. The support we received from friends and neighbors confirmed that exposing the truth had been the right choice, despite its personal cost and emotional difficulty. As Emma entered her teenage years and Jake continued elementary school, they both demonstrated understanding that their family's experience with David's betrayal had taught them important lessons about recognizing deception and valuing authentic relationships. Their ability to process their father's choices without internalizing blame or developing cynicism about all adult relationships showed remarkable emotional intelligence and resilience. The charity auction where I'd exposed David's deception became an annual reminder of the importance of truth-telling and community accountability for behavior that violated shared values and standards. My continued participation in Riverside's social and business activities demonstrated that personal crisis didn't require social withdrawal, and that strength could be found in honest communication about difficult experiences. The private investigator who had documented David's Colorado Springs lifestyle continued to work on cases involving marital deception, often referencing our situation as an example of how systematic lying could be uncovered through professional surveillance and financial analysis. His expertise had been crucial for protecting our legal interests while ensuring that David's misconduct would have appropriate consequences. The divorce attorney who had guided our legal strategy became a resource for other women facing similar situations involving asset concealment and systematic deception by spouses who appeared successful and trustworthy but were actually engaged in elaborate fraud. Patricia's aggressive approach had established precedents for holding deceptive spouses accountable, while protecting victimized families from financial and emotional exploitation. The transformation from betrayed wife to empowered single mother had required enormous emotional strength and practical learning, but it had also revealed capabilities and resilience that I hadn't known I possessed. The experience of uncovering David's deception and protecting my children from its consequences had prepared me for challenges and opportunities that would shape our future in positive ways. 3 years later, Emma and Jake continued to thrive academically and socially, while maintaining limited contact with David during supervised visits that had become routine rather than emotionally charged events. Their adjustment to our family's new structure demonstrated that children could recover from parental betrayal when provided with honest communication, professional support, and stable alternatives to the relationships that had been damaged by deception. David's professional and social rehabilitation remained incomplete, with his reputation in Colorado's construction industry permanently affected by documented evidence of his character flaws and financial misconduct. His relationship choices and their consequences served as a cautionary tale about the long-term costs of prioritizing personal desires over family responsibilities and community standards. My own life had evolved into a balance of professional achievement, community involvement, and family relationships that provided satisfaction and meaning without dependence on romantic partnerships or traditional marriage structures. The independence and self-reliance I'd developed during the investigation and divorce process had created opportunities for personal growth and contribution that might not have been possible within the constraints of our previous family dynamic. The Colorado Springs apartment where David had lived his secret life became a symbol of the elaborate deception that could be maintained by someone willing to systematically lie to the people who trusted him most. The financial and emotional costs of his choices extended far beyond our immediate family to affect professional relationships, community trust, and his children's long-term emotional development. The surveillance photographs that had first documented David's betrayal were preserved as evidence of how completely someone could construct alternate realities while maintaining the appearance of normal family relationships. The images served as a reminder that surface appearances could conceal systematic deception, and that protecting family interests sometimes required professional investigation and legal intervention. The charity auction, where truth had finally been revealed, became an annual reminder of the importance of community accountability and the power of honest communication to expose deception and protect vulnerable family members. My decision to address David's behavior publicly had been vindicated by the community support we received and the legal advantages it provided during divorce proceedings. As I reflected on our journey from discovery to resolution, I realized that David's elaborate deception had ultimately led to a more authentic and satisfying life than our marriage had provided in its final years. His systematic lies had freed us from a relationship built on manipulation and false pretenses, while revealing our own strength and resilience in the face of betrayal and financial fraud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.